Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Small Town Podcast. I'm Brittany Madera, your host. I found that putting together the first episode is unexpectedly difficult. When I came up with the idea for Small Town Podcast, I had so many ideas for episodes. And I still have a lot of ideas, but it feels like there just needs to be some sort of introduction before we plunge right in. I love podcasts. And when I say that, I mean that I spend about 2 or 3 hours a day listening to my favorite shows and maybe exploring some new ones. I'm also a radio newscaster for a set of radio stations here in western Pennsylvania, so hearing myself speak isn't really anything unusual. For more than a few years now, I've had this vague inkling that maybe I should start a podcast because, why not me? The problem was, I wasn't sure that I really had anything to talk about. But the more that I worked at the radio station, the more sure I became about starting Small Town Podcast. Because you see, since the radio station I work at is based in small-town western Pennsylvania, we cover a lot of local news that most people who live more than 30 miles away just would not care about. Meetings, for one. Lots and lots of meetings. School board meetings, township supervisors meetings, county commissioners meetings, borough council meetings, planning commission meetings, you get the idea. And although the meetings aren't usually the most exciting things, I always seem to leave with some sort of new question or insight. Like, what does a mayor really do? I asked one of my journalist friends who I used to work with exactly that question. Sean Yoder used to work at the same radio station, then moved on to writing and editing for the local newspaper. Sean's no stranger to government officials, and he knows what a very special skill set our mayor has.
Mayor George Hood may not have any legislative powers, but what he does have is knowledge of where all the free food is.
That wasn't the only question that I had, though. I also wanted to know what kind of people live in a small town. You see, I've lived in small towns all of my life, and I always thought that the people here were all pretty similar. Another friend from the radio station, however, had a different thought.
All kinds of people live in a small town. I think a small town is much more diverse from the inside out than the outside in. I think stereotypically people look at small towns as backwards. But if you live in a small town, you see there's a great diversity in a small town, but you can't see it from the outside.
That's Anthony Frazier, who runs a show called The Acoustic Hour at the radio station. And though he loves where he lives now, here in western PA, he has some very specific complaints.
Stoplights. I'm not sure who controls or how they're controlled, but they seem to have a mind of their own. And if it's an attempt to slow traffic or to keep traffic going, it's confusing because when there is a lot of traffic, the lights seem to go against traffic flow. And when there is less traffic, the lights seem to go against traffic flow. I'm not sure what the thinking or how the switching or who's in charge of that. And I wonder who is in charge of actually controlling the switching, because the lights can be controlled.
Now, I should mention that Anthony went on to talk about traffic stops and roadways for another 3 to 4 minutes, and whenever we would talk about another topic, like religion or churches, he would always somehow circle back.
Different types of churches, even Mennonite churches, it's really amazing to me how similar they are, but then how different they are, and how they don't work together. People think church is this, I thought church was this, it's church and there's the Pope and the Catholic. But then when you get into Christianity, not all Christians are Catholic. You have pastors who can marry but priests who can't. And it's wait a minute, you have women pastors but you don't have women priests. Well, huh?
Wait for it.
Wait, how? It's confusing. It's probably the same person who designed the church, designed the roads. We need to get the road designer and the church designer in the same room and become more transparent. The road map is very confusing.
There it is. See, it always comes back to the roadways. Some people, like Danielle Pisarek, who also works with me at the radio station, just love living in a small town.
I'm from a very small town that is actually labeled a village. At least that's what's on the small road marker as you enter our city limits. I'm not sure what our current population amount is, but there are more fields than roads and sidewalks. We had a small country store in town, but that has since closed. But you can still get produce and other goods at the Mennonite store just down the road. Yes, the horse and buggies travel up and down our road, and we always wave to those passing by, whether we know the person or not. Although there are pluses and minuses to living in the country, there are pluses and minuses to living in the city too. I have family who live in the city, and when I visit, I see the advantages of more options with a variety of restaurants, clothing stores, and even more movies at the theater. And there's also the convenience of the public transportation, which would be nice on those wintry days. But where I live now, it may take longer to get to places, but that's okay. I may not be able to order a pizza and have it delivered to my front door, but I'll sacrifice some drive time for the peace and quiet, for the great outdoors, for the fields and trees that surround me. I like where I live and don't want to move to a bigger town anytime soon.
Meanwhile, others were ready to get out.
I would say a bad thing about it, though, on the other side would be it's boring. There's no like museums here or art, or if you like sports, like huge professional sports stadiums that you can go to and see games. The nightlife is the same bars. You don't have a very big choice of nightclubs in this area.
That's Bill Karahalios, whose name I am sure I am butchering. Usually we just call him Billy K. Again, one of the people who works at the radio station. Bill's lived just about everywhere, from Greece to a military boarding school to Pittsburgh to Florida, and plenty more that I'm forgetting. He lives in a small town now because his parents own a restaurant and they are getting older.
3 words to describe life in a small town. I would say boring, safe, not exciting. Well, that would be the same as boring. That'd be boring. That would be boring. 3 words, huh? Okay. I said boring, safe, and family.
Now, with this podcast, I'd like to help answer and explore some questions about small towns. Sure, there are some questions about how a small town usually runs and operates, like the question before about what a mayor really does, or maybe other questions like how your water gets to you, or what happens when you're part of a homeowners association and you forget to cut your grass. And then there are the questions about specific towns, such as why is there a town in Pennsylvania named after Jim Thorpe, even though Jim Thorpe himself had never actually even lived there? Or what about those towns in Alaska where products get shipped via helicopter? Or is there really a town in New Mexico where no one lives and everything is fake? My favorite things to think about, though, seem to be the questions that are more personal to everyone. Like, how do I escape from here? How do I move back to my hometown? Should I become Facebook friends with the people that I graduated with? If small towns are supposed to be friendly and intimate, then why don't I know anyone? Did my brother's friend's cousin's boyfriend really go into that haunted house and never return? Do I actually really need to lock my door? I had also put out a call on the internet for people to talk to me about some of their questions about small towns. Here's Haroja Shaib.
Why in a small town is something new considered bad, but something bad and old is considered good? For example, in my small town, there is a quote-unquote grocery store that has been here for 30 years, but no longer, if ever did, fits the needs of the community. A community, a majority of whom have to drive anywhere from 8 to 13 miles to a grocery store a town over in order to shop. When a new grocery store attempted to build in the area, a very vocal and active small minority of the town have fought for 3 years to keep it out of the town. And the reason why they want to keep it out of this small town is because it would have a negative impact on the small town in itself. For example, they believe that this new grocery store would alter the aesthetics of the small town, increase the amount of people using the roadways to get in and out of the grocery store, and it would have also an environmental impact, a major one, on the small town. So rather than having a grocery store that would fit the needs of the community, they would prefer that people would drive 8 to 13 miles in their gas-guzzling cars on the roads all the way to the town over than to utilize a grocery store that many of them could easily walk to and from to their homes than have this grocery store built. Not to mention, they also cite the economic impact that this new grocery store may have on the town. For example, they often cite that the grocery store has been here for 30 years that no one really utilizes because they drive the 8 to 13 miles to the grocery store would have a negative impact because nobody would use it at all, even though no one already doesn't use it at all now. That's the questions I have.
She does have her own podcast, Musings of a Shibe, which focuses on technology and Dogecoin and the laws of robotics and so many more fun things. You can find Musings of a Shibe at musingsofashibe.wordpress.com. That's Shibe spelled S-H-I-B-E. Also on facebook.com/musingsofashibe, a podcast, and on Twitter with the handle @musingsofashibe. Now, as for me and this podcast, you can find us online at smalltownpodcast.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/smalltownpodcast, and on Twitter with the handle @smalltowncast. Again, that's no pod in there, it's just @smalltowncast. Send your emails to smalltownpodcastemail@gmail.com. That's it for this first episode. Thanks to everyone who helped to lend a voice this time. You are all fantastic. And thanks as well to my fiancé Jeremy, who puts up with me recording and editing this on the computer in the living room. I'm constantly complaining when he makes too much noise. Ew, stop it! Stop it! I'll see you next time on Small Town Podcast.